Hello and welcome everyone to this latest Society for the Environment webinar, Reaching Net Zero in the Built Environment, the Future Home Standard Explained. My name is Sarah Ridgen. I'm the Policy and Communications Officer at Society for the Environment, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Before we go any further, I have a few housekeeping notes. The main thing you need to know is that you can direct questions to our special guest speaker today via the Q&A option on your toolbar at any time throughout the webinar. The toolbar is likely to be at the foot of your screen, and if you cannot see this, just hover around the bottom of your screen and it should appear. Once located, simply tap your question into the text box provided and click or tap submit. I will run through the questions once we've heard some insights from our expert speaker today. Secondly, you are all on mute. As with all of our webinars, this is nothing against you. It just helps the webinar run smoothly without distractions or background noise. The webinar today is being recorded and will be available in the coming days via our website, YouTube channel, and if you have opted in to receive emails from us, you will receive an email with the recording link. So as a way of introduction to ourselves very quickly, the Society for the Environment, CABE, is a not-for-profit umbrella body which brings together professional institutions from different sectors and licenses them to award 3 environmental professional registrations: Chartered Environmentalist, CM, Registered Environmental Practitioner, RMP, and Registered Environmental Technician, RMTech. There are 24 professional bodies licensed by CABE, who between them have over 7,500 RMTech, RMP, and CM registrants as members. The Chartered Association of Building Engineers, CABE, are one of our licensed members, and many of you attending today will be members of CABE. CABE have a license to award all 3 registrations, so if you are a member of CABE or one of our other licensed members, you are eligible to become a CM, RMP, or RMTech, so long as you meet the competencies. If you'd like to find out more about showcasing your expertise by gaining environmental professional registration, please check out the web pages shown on screen for more info or get in contact with me, and my contact details are on the screen now. I'm delighted now to welcome our guest speaker for today. Speaking on the topic of reaching net zero in the built environment, the future home standard explained, is Dr. Gavin Dunn, CEO of CABE. Gavin will be looking at the background of the new future home standard and providing an overview of the standard that will require new build homes to be future-proof with low carbon heating and world-leading levels of energy efficiency. Speaking in his capacity as CABE CEO, Gavin will also provide reflections on the impact of the standard on CABE members and the work of the built environment sector more generally, as it moves towards the goal of reaching net zero. Before I hand over to Gavin, a quick reminder to use the Q&A option in your toolbar at any stage, and I will ask your questions to Gavin after his talk. So Gavin, for the next half an hour or so, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can, yes.
Excellent. I just want to be able to take over and share my screen, which hopefully will be happening now.
Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, for the purposes of making it a bit more personal, I'll try and keep my video on where I can. Anyway, so thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to you today. As introduced, I'm Dr. Gavin Dunn, and for the last 4 years or so, it's been my distinct pleasure to be the Chief Executive of the Chartered Association of Building Engineers, an organisation for which I've been a member of now for over 20 years. And if you haven't come across us before, we are a chartered professional body, member of Society Environment, and full member of the Engineering Council. And the building engineers are what I like to call the building geeks, a range of professionals, engineers who are highly technical in nature and focus on the built environment, but perhaps work across a variety of specialist roles, which don't fit in some of the more traditional or larger professional body boxes. So many of our members are in building control or in warranty, technical designers, sustainability specialists like myself, fire safety specialists, fire engineering, indeed buildings operations and maintenance. So we span the full range of life cycle and procurement supply chains of the built environment, but all our members are very highly technical in nature. And so it's from that context that I speak to you today. And aligned to that is the work I've been doing, and I've been a member of the Building Regulations Advisory Committee now for a number of years. And with that hat, I had the opportunity to chair the work of the BRAC, which was supporting the department, now known as Levelling Up Community Housing and Communities, but then had a previous name. And as those of you know, that department changes names quite regularly, in leading the work around improving energy, environmental and ventilation performance of homes in recent years. And that's what I'll be principally talking to you about today. Now that fits in absolutely with what CABE is doing about the environment more generally. We have quite a broad comprehensive sustainability policy, which is aiming to do a number of things. So first of all, the association is on its own journey to being net zero, and we're making considerable progress in that direction. We have also undertaken a lot of work to embed and support sustainability practice within our members. And indeed, we're very pleased to say that we're one of the first professional bodies that actually, if a member undertakes something that ultimately damages the environment, that can actually be considered a disciplinary case within our association. But also both in the organisation, within the headquarters team, and with volunteer members, we've been working to help improve the standards available in the market. So a lot of our members have been involved in things like PAS 2035, the retrofit standards, and obviously a number of CABE members and myself have been heavily involved with the Future Home Standard, or what we now often in government is now being referred to FLOS, FLONS, as in ventilation, energy efficiency, overheating, and electric car charging, the FLOS, now known as the FLOS team. So keep changing, but I'll talk to and refer to it today in the context of the Future Home Standard. Please be aware, yes, I'm a member of the Building Regulations Advisory Committee, and the work that I'll be sharing with you today was done on behalf of that in support of government and government officials. That said, please do not, and you cannot assume that I speak for government. Indeed, the whole point of an independent scientific advisory committee is that we are independent voices, we are from the industry. So what I'll be sharing with you today is my opinion, my interpretation of what has gone on, but obviously it's from a point of or sharing you the experience of what has happened and the engagement we've had with government. But please do not accept or take that this is any official government statement whatsoever, because it is not. The other thing I should say is that the work we led was specifically amendments to the building regulations for England, and we are talking about probably the largest, most integrated and most comprehensive set of changes to the building regulations in a couple of decades, all focused around building performance with various environmental aspects to it. But that work was also, it's important to note, was shadowed by the devolved officials from the devolved governments in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So similar work and regulatory changes will be occurring in those jurisdictions as well. The England piece, the Future Home Standard, was kind of the lead piece, and then the devolved administrations will make their own versions of it, which are coming through. But today I specifically talk about what's being proposed for England, because we can't cover off all the variabilities for the different areas. So what I intend to do is take you through a high-level overview for about 30 minutes of how we've got to where we are, what the Future Home Standard is, where it is in its journey, and to some of the things about some of the fundamentals about why it's happening, because there's always reasons why these things come about. Some of those are political, some of those are economic, and some of those are just the nature of the industry and what's the logical next steps. And then hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end for some questions. Okay, so that's hopefully it's useful. Just waiting to find my slide moving piece. Right, hopefully you can now see my next slide. So I'll get through. So principally, the Future Home Standard is a series of amendments to the building regulations. So these are the minimum standards for new build housing. There is other work going on around existing building and non-domestic buildings, but I'll reserve my comments today to new build housing standards. And in particular, Part L for energy efficiency, conservation of fuel and power, Part F for ventilation, and the newly introduced section of the building regulations, or part of the building regulations, covering overheating. And this is part of a broader journey that goes back to 2002, up until this change was significantly regulated by the European Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And for those of you who have been aware of what's been going on with new build housing, there's been a general drive towards carbon compliance and improving energy efficiency in a series of staged ways, starting in 2002, where there was the first optional standard to demonstrate compliance through a carbon standard. But the big changes were in 2006, where we switched over to a mandatory carbon compliance standard for demonstrating compliance to Part L, with a series of planned progressive tightening of those standards and ratcheting up of the expectations around energy performance, originally gearing up, so 2010, 2013, and then originally with the, that was then Yvette Cooper's plan in 2006, that by 2016, we would have been building zero carbon homes. Now, of course, for various reasons, that didn't happen. It was ultimately scrapped ahead of its implementation. You could argue that that is in large part down to the economic situation in post-2008. You could argue it was probably because they'd never, that zero is a very difficult thing to discuss, and they've never actually agreed what they meant by zero, or various other economic factors. But for whatever reason, as part of the Housing Standards Review in 2015, that target was scrapped. As a result, the current version of Part L20 Part L that houses follow is 2013, unless they had transitional agreements for sites for 2010 or 2006. And indeed, at this point, still the bulk of homes will be building often to those lower standards. So it's part of that journey. And the idea was that, we've lost 6 years. I mean, ultimately, we should have been getting to these levels of standards in 2016. We are where we are. And the work of the group, and in particular, on a sort of personal note, the reason I took on this work was to try and get us moving forward again in terms of building regulations requirements. And I think we've had some success in that. Obviously, we'd definitely like to have gone further and faster, but sometimes you just push the system as fast as you can go. The big changes happened. So the original onus for this work was a cost optimal review, which is required by the European directive. So if you think about 2016-17, we were still in the European Union. So the government did have to undertake a cost optimal review, which was required from Europe, which was effectively a review that's undertaken every 5 years to ensure that the minimum requirements that are being set by building regulations meet cost optimality. In other words, they go as far as they can within the definition of cost effectiveness. So were measures, were additional levels of insulation, etc., paying for themselves within the timeline. So you had to constantly review. So that was the original onus of the work. But as the work got started, things got a bit more interesting. And keep in mind, particularly from a working group's point of view, they got more interesting because we got more excuse to do more. We got more empowerment to go further. And the big shift was the work under then Theresa May's government, first with the nationally legally binding requirement to get to 2050 for reduction in carbon emissions. Then on the back of that, Theresa May government's clean growth strategy and the Prime Minister's grand challenge. And significant elements here in terms of change. So they push around decarbonising electricity grid further and faster, phasing out and starting to make phasing out of fossil fuels, initially in off-grid, gas grid situations, but accepting that in the longer run, we will have to, certainly to get to zero carbon, we will have to do away with burning gas to heat our homes. A future-proofing of all new homes so that when they do have to, gas is taken away, we have to, they need to be built in such a way that they're not difficult to convert to zero carbon or low carbon heat. That seems to be a sensible thing to do. If you know that's a change that's going to happen in the first 15 or 20 years of the life of a home, it makes sense to build them in a way that they're easily retrofittable later, even down to the level of things like cooking, and a piece of work around 2030 for retrofitting of existing homes. Now, this work doesn't cover that, but the first 4 elements there, this work does significantly respond to. And the first big change, and this is a big fundamental shift, is in the way the regulations and the things like the SAP calculations reflect the types of energy being used. In SAP and in Part L of the building regulations for probably the last 15 or 20 years or so, there has been a presumption and a favouring of the burning of natural gas where you're on the gas grid for UK homes. And this was deemed as a very cost-effective, but certainly, if you roll the clock back a couple of decades, a sensible transitional fuel in terms of it was relatively low cost, it was relatively efficient, it was relatively low carbon compared to previous energy mixes. And certainly compared to electricity in the past, it was both cheaper and greener. Hence, regulations absolutely favoured new build housing, and anyone who'd gone through the process of designing and building and specifying to the Part L, whether it be 2006 or 2013, you would have known if you were on the gas grid and you could put a gas boiler in, life became a lot easier. However, that is no longer going to be the case moving forward. 2 things have happened. So first of all, we now know we have to phase out the use of gas, burning of natural gas in our lifetimes. And this is a very big infrastructure shift. But also the UK electricity is getting a lot greener, indeed far greener than I'd ever hoped for. I think 2012 we were about 8% renewables on the UK grid over the year. By 2018 we were at 55%, and current estimates put us by the early 2030s that the UK grid hopefully will be effectively zero carbon over the course of the year. Now, that's a very profound shift in the energy, the relative dirtiness of energy. And along the way, the relative cost differential between gas and electricity is narrowed as well. So whereas 10 years ago, we were looking at electricity and it was relatively dirty, relatively expensive, and gas was the alternative, clearly the regulations favors gas. What we're seeing now is a need to shift the other way. Electricity is getting cleaner, and it is not as expensive comparatively as gas. So the first big shift, and if you only take one thing away from this presentation, this is it. Up until these changed the regulations, gas was good, electricity was bad. It was in the regulations, it was in the calculations, it was just the way that things were pushed through. That is now completely turning on its head. And moving forward, that will definitely be the case in the fact that we will now be gas bad, electricity good. Now that changes a lot of the energy mix that we'll be using in our homes. And hence the key change in the regulations will be a shift to primary energy, which will favour electricity. Other drivers that I want to talk about, and this is the bit that if I was a government official, I would probably not be able to say, which I'm not, which is great, which is I think we also have to recognise that we need to learn from mistakes. And, I've been involved with the rollout of the Energy Performance Buildings Directive and SAP and energy efficiency standards now for over 20 years. And we have come a long way. The current regulations, however much they have not achieved as much as we would have liked, the energy efficiency of our homes is significantly better than it was than in the past. And that's a good thing. And we should recognize that we've come a long way and we're making improvements. But let's not also pretend that everything is perfect. And actually, there's a number of unintended consequences or challenges that have come up over that way that we want to highlight. And it was felt, and in making these changes with the Future Home Standard, just not only to support increasing the energy efficiency and the decarbonisation of our homes, to make that big shift from gas to electric in terms of a principal form for heating, but also start to address some of the challenges, because if you build a zero carbon home, but it's a really bad home and the occupants aren't very healthy, or it doesn't perform as it should, a lot of the benefits are lost. So the first unintended consequence we always talk about is overheating. And this is a significant challenge and has resulted in an entirely new part of the building regulations looking to address this. And the simple concern is this, and it's two parts. Firstly, the propensity for our homes to overheat in particularly hot summer spells is significant. And I just lost my camera. Hopefully that will come back on in a second. And so the current design practices in homes are leading to homes overheating. So hot spells during the summer period, we're getting some extreme temperatures that you can't easily cool down. 2003, the particularly hot spell there, in France was 35,000 additional deaths. In excess of 7,000 additional deaths in the UK. Now, these were generally vulnerable persons, but because they were in a very high heat stress environment and they couldn't get away from it, additional deaths occurred in that period of time. So it is directly linked to mortality. So this kills people. We also know that there's links to the economy in terms of particularly disruption to sleep. And in excess use of air conditioning. So more people put in air conditioning if they can't keep their homes cool, which is obviously not good for energy efficiency, but also for those that do have air conditioning, if your home is overheating, it's additional loads. You then throw in the fact that climate change is happening. There are effects of climate change, and certainly by the mid this decade, we expect about half the country, the lower half of the UK, to have significant occurrence of summer overheating during hot spells, in addition because of climate change. CABE has, and some of the work they've done, suggests that as many, if we carry on doing what we're currently doing, as many as 4,500 people a year by 2050 could die in our homes through excess heat. So we've got to make sure that we're building homes that are very energy efficient and nice and warm and affordable to heat in winter. We've got to make sure that they also don't overheat in summer and indeed kill vulnerable people. So that's one of the key issues we need to address. The other key area I just want to touch on is indoor air quality and ventilation. The evidence of compliance with ventilation requirements and the evidence around the quality of air available in UK homes is poor. It's probably, all the evidence suggests that compliance is very, very low and air quality is far worse than we would expect. And that's indoor, and there's lots of reasons for that. But as we move forward, clearly this has serious health effects. But as we move forward, as we build even higher performing homes, it's really important we put much greater emphasis on the ventilation of homes to ensure people's health. In particular, we know in high performance homes we're much more likely to need the use of mechanical ventilation or mechanical ventilation heat recovery. This is a key technology. I'm a big proponent of it when done well. And unfortunately, the evidence at the moment suggests that all too often it isn't properly designed, it isn't properly installed, it isn't properly maintained, or users told how to use it. As a result, that can create not only poor air quality and maintenance issues, but also concerns around excess energy use. So ventilation needs to be, as we go on this journey of even higher performance homes from an energy and carbon point of view, we have to make sure that they're health and good places to be. So you'll see lots of focus on trying to help the industry comply better with ventilation requirements. And the third area we want to talk about is the performance gap. Now, this is a real challenge, because as we build higher and higher performance, or specify higher and higher performance homes, what we're seeing is a proportion of those homes not performing to that standard. And the evidence suggests that there's some quite big performance gaps. But this is really complicated. Exactly pinning down what and why this is occurring is really challenging. However, in 2012, ministers essentially put the industry on notice that said, we expect you to start addressing the performance gap because homes using 2 or 3 times the amount of energy as they're supposed to is not acceptable. And if you don't resolve it, we will start to regulate. So guess what? The government is starting to take a more active role, let's call it that. Some house builders might call it draconian, about bringing this together. But it is a really complicated issue in terms of understanding actual performance, because we can design a home to a particular standard, but that assumes the home is going to be used in a particular way. Then there's a whole series of things that aren't taken into account in the way we use homes. And we know we can put different families into different homes and get different performances. It's a bit like when I drive a car rating, your miles per gallon prediction, but depending on how many people in it, how much stuff you've got in the back, or how you drive it, or the weather conditions, or the temperature, you can get actual different performance. And that's completely within the normal realms. The concern is, though, however, even all the research suggests that even when you take into account design issues, even when you take into account all the known unknowns, as it were, there's still a pretty big gap in performance. In other words, additional poor performance that cannot be explained. And this can, for some homes, be significant in amounts of energy loss. It's likely to be to do with issues in the design and build process, product substitution, and build quality issues, but it's really difficult to pin down. But there will be significant work on this. Initially, some basic things in 2021, but then a big push around this on 2020-25. So what's going on then? So that's a bit of the background. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what's happening, why it's happening, some of the big themes. So the government has undertaken to bring in the Future Home Standard. It will be brought in 2 ways. And initially, also I should say 2 stages. Initially, an uplift to the regulations on parts L and F, and the introductions of a new part O for overheating, starting in 2021, which have now been published, and they have become law at the end of last year, and they will come into effect for new home applications starting in June of 2022. And that's an interim step, basically goes half the way to the full Future Home Standard. And there's a program of works that's been put in place then to develop the detail of the Future Home Standard. A high-level sort of framework has been published on it already and consulted upon. The detail is that those working groups are starting now, and as I understand it, the intent is to consult on that in 2023, publish it and bring it into law in 2024 for implementation in 2025. Now, the Future Home Standard itself is quite a big step forward. So compared to 2013 standards, it's about a 70% reduction in carbon compared to that standard, as well as increased requirements around ventilation, overheating, and work on performance gap as well. So comprehensive shift, major change to the way and the standard for which homes are going to have to be designed and built, to much greater accountability to those building homes to ensure that they do indeed deliver what they say. If you then put that in the context of the new Homes Ombudsman, the new Home Quality Standard, this is part of a wider range of changes by government to essentially specify much higher expectations of built performance and much greater consumer protection in terms of ensuring that is delivered. So what does that look like? Increase in 2021, ventilation, I think I've already covered all those things. In terms of the consultation the government undertook, there was a couple of things to note here. So first of all, over 3,000 responses. Building regulations response for Part L normally gets 200-300, maybe 150 responses. Something's very, very different this time. And the vast majority of those responses essentially saying you need to do more faster. It's getting too late, get on with it. And that's both from industry and members of the public, as well as various environmental groups. So if anyone thinks this isn't going to happen, or indeed the pace of change is going to slow down, very much not the case. Indeed, I think the government got a very clear message from that, that they need to be doing more. If 68% of responses say this isn't going far enough, you can expect acceleration as more to come through over time. So what does the future home standard look like itself? I think compared to 2013, about 75% lower in terms of carbon emissions. Effectively then required to be on electricity, so no gas in the home at all, so not for heating or for cooking. Very, very high fabric expectations, so a fabric first, so build the building to be a very, very tight, high thermal performance building, and then service the residual loads, whether it be heating, cooling, ventilation, through as low carbon technology as you can, and on the basis that the electricity grid is decarbonising, those are typically electrically driven. About 30% shift for the coming year, and 75% for 2025. Lots of people thinking about heat pumps, and there's definitely some stuff in the market about confusion about the banning of gas boilers. They clearly won't be able to be installed in new homes from 2025 onwards. 2021s you can, and I've seen some headlines in the marketplace around banning of gas boilers generally. You can still use gas for 2021, but in doing so, you've got to meet slightly higher fabric performance, and you've got to use low temperature radiators or under-floor heat emitters so that they're easily convertible to heat pumps later. Everyone's looking to heat pumps as the solution here, and they do appear to be the most cost-effective solution through. My advice is be very, very careful. If you're a house builder and you think I can carry on basically building what I currently build, and I'm just going to bung a heat pump in, but I think you be careful. The heat pumps, really do need to design them. You need to design the fabric and the heat emitters with that in mind to get best performance. Otherwise, you can end up with some homes that don't perform very well or give very high energy costs to their owners. So heat pumps are a very important part of the puzzle here, and scaling up the supply chains to deliver heat pumps is really, really important. But getting the fabric right from a house builder's point of view is probably the most important thing. To get heat pumps and things like that to work well in 2021 standards, but for 2025, it's going to be absolutely essential. So general timeline, I think I've already covered, but that gives you an idea. June 2022, the new requirements kicking in on the interim standard. We expect to get in 2023 a good idea of what the final 2025 standards will look like, and those should be on track for implementation so publishing becoming law in 2024 and coming out as into law in 2025. Along the way, government's also been looking at the relationship between building regulations and planning, and there was a proposal to restrict. It actually goes back to 2015 in the Housing Standards Review. The government actually granted itself powers to restrict planners from requiring anything above the minimum regulations. It will not be happening. Planners will still have the right to, as planning condition from a point of view, local authority plans and things, to require higher standards. So if you're working in London, you're still going to be working to the London plan in addition to the Future Home Standard. I know if you're a large house builder, you'd love to have the same thing everywhere. There's some real sympathy to that position, and maybe some advantages it in many regards, but that's certainly not happening at this stage. And the consultation is very clear. People don't want it either. People feel local planners should be able to specify higher performance where they feel it's so appropriate. So for 2021, government consulted on two options, a lower and higher standard. As I said earlier, they are going ahead with the higher standards, so immediate uplift of 31% in terms of carbon. which is somewhere between £3,000 and £5,000 additional on average per home to comply with, depending on which technology mix you use. The regulations are technology agnostic, so it's a bit like at the moment, and you do SAP calculations, as long as you meet the requirements. Which technologies you choose to use is entirely up to you. I say there is a presumption around electric heating, and there's a presumption around high thermal fabric performance for 2021, and obviously change again. The range of metrics being used, we're going for they're proposed 4, but we're going to have 4, but they're slightly different. To comply with the bin regulations, we'll have to demonstrate 4 things. So first of all, your primary energy usage is below a certain standard. That's effectively the amount of electricity used is below the target. There will be minimum fabric and services efficiency requirements. So all the individual elements, whether that be a lighting installation or the installation in a wall, will need to meet the minimum standards. There will be a carbon emissions check, so that you're not developing something that's low energy but high carbon. And the fabric energy efficiency standard will be retained. And this really double underlines the requirement around getting the fabric right and driving performance through good quality, high performance fabric. If those combination of 4 measures for some building types is going to give some house builders challenges quite quickly. Certain house types on certain fuel types, you're going to find that you're going to have to go significantly further on the fabric performance than you have in the past, even in the 2021 uplift. You get the idea. Much tighter requirements around U values and a continued step forward, but achievable, but perhaps moving forwards, and minimum fabric standards in each individual element moving forward. You get an idea of some of the numbers. One thing on air permeability, some changes there, some tightening, and a general uplifting of the efficiency requirements of all of the building services. So if you are still using gas boilers, there's requirements. If you're using heat pumps, they've gone up, the requirements have gone up. If you're putting cooling in, the minimum efficiency requirements have gone up as well as the expectation about the efficiency of electric lighting, all of which are deemed cost effective, achievable and available technologies now. And of course, these are just the minimum requirements. You of course can go ahead and put better than that in, and you'll get benefit from that in the calculations, as well as obviously having better performing homes. On air tightness, there is quite a big shift here, which we need to highlight to you. So if you are a house builder or involved in this side of things, air tightness will now be on every single home. So gone are you sample test a number of homes on a given development. It is now every single dwelling will be tested. The governance of the testing methodologies is being shifted and brought under an industry group, and in particular the CIBSE TM23 guidance is new and about to come out, which will set the standards for how this will be done. And there's new options for new test types in terms of pulse testing. So if you're an air pressure tester, the blower doors works at 50 pascals. A pulse test is a newer technology which works at more ambient pressure levels and is now acceptable for use in the building regulations as well with these changes. On ventilation, the general approach stays. So it's still a performance-based requirement, but much simplified guidance is being provided. So I say that the focus is on getting people to get it right. So there will be a reduction in the number of systems available within the approved documents. That doesn't mean you can't use those other systems. It just means if you use them, you've got to actually design them. And the big change there is passive stack ventilation. And for those using natural guidance, there is a shift to a room by room approach, whereby the amount of ventilation or the free area on ventilators is now defined by room and not an average on the whole house. The idea there is to make it super simple. So if I've got a living room, I need a ventilator this big. If I've got a bathroom, the ventilator should be this big. I guess, trying to make it construction industry proof because it was being missed. In terms of the performance gap, 2021, you're going to start to see a few things introduced with a view to increase transparency and accountability in the process to ensure people are building what they're building. But these aren't massive step changes, but there's about trying to increase accountability through the better provision of information, and in particular, evidence of what is being built, including photographs. If you're a house builder, you're going to love this one. You're not, but you need to do it because it's necessary, which is photographic evidence of what is being built, and someone taking responsibility, a named individual taking responsibility, and for each home signing off to say this was built in accordance to these details. Here is the photographic evidence, and that information needs to be verified by the SAP assessor before the final completion documentation compliance documentation is created. The logic there is saying that if things do change during the construction process, the energy assessment calculations are much more likely to be properly updated to ensure compliance hasn't been compromised. But the naming of individuals and the photographs is about trying to create some more transparency and accountability, so that in the future, if there is a problem with the performance of the home, it's much easier because all that information has to be then passed on to the homeowner for them to trace back as to what went wrong and who might be accountable for putting it right. And that's just the first step. And I would expect in 2025, things to go much further. Indeed, it might get to the point where the fabric performance is actually just tested. There are a number of technologies coming forward to suggest that that can cost effectively assess actual thermal heat loss through the fabric of a building. And it would not surprise me at all if those become mandatory in 2025. So in other words, a bit like pressure testing, the house builder would actually undertake a test, possibly after the home first occupant has moved in, to actually test how the building is actually performing. Now that really will create some accountability. It'll be a real challenge because fixing things once they're complete is very, very difficult. And therefore it puts the onus on the house builder to get it right in the first place. So time will tell on that one. Some of the technology is coming through, but perhaps not quite ready, or the standards aren't quite ready. So toe in the water on performance gap in 2021, lots more on overheating, lots more on ventilation and higher energy standard. Performance gap very much therefore coming back to in 2025 in a more earnest way. The other thing is, and I know there's lots of questions about pace, one of the more, let's call it a more aggressive ways that these will be implemented is through the transitional arrangements. Many of you will know that when new regulations come in, there's usually a transitional arrangement which allows things that are approved prior to the commencement date to go through on the old regulations. And over time, some of those arrangements have ended up being very, very long. Indeed, there are still homes being built to 2006 standards today. So this time around, the aim is to make this faster and still trying to strike a balance between homeowners and house builders. But now, so it recognizes that there's a need for transitionals to not disrupt housing supply, but to make it significantly shorter. And so the shift from your transitional arrangements being agreed on a site-by-site basis, and now are we on a house or building by building point, so individual home or block of flats. So your work has to have started within 12 months of the regulatory change on the individual building, and it's a meaningful start. Otherwise, the new regulations apply. So if you're putting things through approvals now, if they haven't started on site on the individual home by so 12 months from commencement, so that will be June 2023. you will have to comply with the new regulations. So hopefully it's a reasonable compromise. It does mean these are big changes, they're complicated changes, but they're going to affect people much faster than in the past. To support all this, there's been a significant simplification of the approved guidance. 6 documents effectively become 2, and that's just on the L side, same again on the F, etc. The services compliance guides are now being incorporated into the approved documents themselves. So final thoughts then, because I've raveted on for my allotted time. I'm very conscious this is a very quick overview of what's happening and why. There's literally days of study and hundreds of pages of documents to go through on the detail. But hopefully, if everyone understands what's happening, why is it happening, from a fundamental point of view, you can start to make the right decisions in its implementation when it comes to the detail. So things I'd like to highlight to you, though, as key takeaways. The switch from gas to electricity as the main source of heat in our homes is very significant. It's absolutely necessary, as it won't be too many decades away where we're phasing out gas in its entirety. However, and this is the big message, to be effective, to work, to build homes that are genuinely perform and the consumers are going to be happy with, there has to be a step change in the fabric performance to be successful. And if you're a house builder and you're not looking at your fabric, when you're looking at complying with these new standards, both for the interim change in 2021 and 2025, you beware that you're making your life much more difficult to you. Lots of people are going to be looking to heat pumps as the preferred solution to meet these requirements, and there are concerns over the ability of the market to spin up enough capacity, both in terms of product supply, but most important, the number of available and appropriately skilled people to design, install, and commission these systems. A lot of work's going into that, and support's going into that to ramp this up, but it doesn't exist there in the market today, so watch out for that. That could catch you out. As I said before, if you just think you're going to throw a heat pump in and everything's going to be okay, again, you could end up with some challenges. Performance gap, it's one of the big challenges. 2021 it's starting on that journey, creating some accountability, but expect more in 2025 and expect a significant shift in 2025, particularly around fabric performance. So again, there's an even bigger reason to start getting your fabric right now. The transitional arrangements mean these regulations, say they're the biggest, most complicated change in a long time, but the transitionals mean they're going to hit you much faster and hit the house builders much faster than previous changes to the regulations. Don't think they're not going to affect you, and don't think they're not going to affect you relatively quickly. Existing homes is the next big challenge, and probably so is things like embodied energy. Those aren't involved in this change, but they're very much next on the regulatory agenda for the department. So I think I will leave it there and then take some questions.
Thank you, Gavin. I thought it was a really excellent overview, so thank you very much. And I know I myself learned a lot there, so thank you. So as you say, if we move now to the Q&A section of the webinar, so we've already had quite a lot of questions through. We have about 10 minutes, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. For any that we don't get to, we can always I can always take your questions and give them to Gavin and get your response maybe through email, so bear that in mind. So Gavin, if I just try and get through as many as I can, like I say, quickly. So maybe just a quick one to start with. There's a question about the water efficiency aspects for the standard. Do you see opportunities to do more on that aspect?
I think so. Over time, I mean, these changes weren't focused on water. The water efficiency changes were the ones essentially carrying over from what we had before. There are a number of areas moving forward which will get looked at. Again, I've already mentioned embodied. I know there's very much a push now around embodied to move forward. It will come after these changes, but the wheels are now turning. I would fully expect water to be in that space as well. But that's not my particular area of expertise, so I probably should leave the comments there.
Fair enough, thank you. Another quick question here. Beyond improved fabric, what are the implications of the Future Home Standard for the design of new homes? Does it mean reduced size for glazed openings, for example?
Not necessarily, but certainly the careful placement of glazing and a much greater focus on not just U values in the selection of glazing, but also the G values. So not just worrying about heat loss, but also worrying about heat gains. I didn't touch on much on the overheating piece, just from a time point of view, but there's a whole new part of the building regulations dealing with overheating. And that will effectively have a two-stage process. It will be a sort of a relatively high-level risk assessment that says what type of thing you're building, where is it? In other words, is it high likelihood of overheating? And if so, you then have to do a detailed calculation to assess actual heat overheating risk. And with those homes, you're going to have to look very carefully about orientation, glazing, size, type, shading, and things like that. And I suspect over time, this is going to become more and more just the normal practice of what we have to do.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Moving just quickly on to the next question, can you give an opinion on the use of electric boilers as an alternative to heat pumps? Could they be just as good if the grid is decarbonised?
Short answer is yes, but you've got to get your fabric right. I see my camera's jumping in and out, but yes, so electric heating, not just electric boilers, but also direct electric. So think in 2025, very, very high fabric performance. If you're, say, a flat, actually, you've got very little heating load at all. In fact, your biggest heat demand in your home is now going to be hot water. So electric boilers or instantaneous hot water for those systems become key. Actually, small electric heaters or irradiant systems might become very suitable, appropriate products, heating systems to use in many home types, simply because the amount of heating will be so low. Actually, a cheap and efficient way of electric heating makes a lot of sense. And put your money in maybe a great ventilation system or very high performance glazing.
Absolutely, and just related to that, really, there's a question about is there a definite date from which gas boilers will no longer be permissible, both in individual dwellings and in development energy centres? So
for new build, yes, you won't be putting them in new homes from 2025. In terms of more broadly, I don't know if there's an exact number, but I'm hearing 2035 for the sale of new gas boilers has been bounded around. I think that's less certain and picks up a much wider range of political issues than just the building regulations.
Brilliant. Just moving swiftly on with the number of questions. So, my question, it disappeared for a moment there. It's come back. Will house builders need to submit new designs or specifications for approval where a scheme overlaps the transitional arrangements?
Yes, so if you've got a site scheme which doesn't commence work on all of the individual buildings, and I know people like NHBC are working on some more detailed guidance about what is appropriate commencement of works. I think it's more than just a bit of foundation and a bit of drainage. You will have to redesign those buildings, those individual homes. If you're halfway through, you'll have to reconfigure those buildings to meet the new standard, or you've got to get meaningful start done. Hence my point about this thing is, however much we would love to think we can go more faster, this is really pushing the boundaries of how fast the industry can go. If you're not thinking about this, if you've got a large site that's due to complete later next year, be careful. You could get caught out.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that. With the new, there's another question here. With the new change, will developers be able to set out foundations for all plots, therefore staggering completions to maintain the current regulations on that plot?
Yeah, so ultimately, what warrants a meaningful start on an individual building is a conversation and agreement between you and your friendly building control body. Like I said, in the past, that was interpreted quite widely. I think this time around, there's some higher expectations, there's some tighter wording from government, and there is industry guidance coming forward. I know NHBC are looking at defining this much more carefully, so that it's clear what is a commencement and which isn't. And I think that works reasonably well advanced, so builders can start assessing which builds they may have to reconsider, or upgrading to the new standards, or which ones they can get work done. But it's going to be it's considerably more work is expected than perhaps has happened in the past.
Sure, thank you. Maybe move on slightly to a different area. What support is there to improve supply chains and reskill the construction industry? Good question.
Oh God, there's a huge question. Look, there are skills. One of the key challenges in this is there are skills gaps across the board. There is a shortage of people. There's a lot of effort going into the heat pump world at the moment, both in terms of subsidies and funding for both the training of people, but also for to pump prime the cost effective, to try and to raise volumes and bring the cost of these things down. So there will continue to be pushes around that area. Quite frankly, it's one of the reasons why I worry about how fast we push, because we need to push forward. Climate and politics tells us we need to do more faster. Construction industry, ways we procure, and massive skill shortages suggests that if we push too hard, we end up with badly built homes that don't perform, or you end up putting which is all equally as difficult politically. So yeah, I'm really worried. The one good thing out of all this is that because the expectation of performance is so different, the sort of assumed cost of construction is a certain level, where a lot of technologies which are currently perhaps dismissed, or approaches that are currently dismissed on cost grounds, become less of a differential and therefore become possible. So it's a lot of things we've been talking about for a long time, MMC, etc. Different construction methods become much more cost viable.
Yeah, absolutely. Skills challenge, a big challenge for us all. Quick question while I've got you, Gavin, is will the slides be made available to all attendees? Hopefully, yes.
We can make these slides available by PDF. I can sort that.
Brilliant. Out. Yeah, and that's in addition to the recording, which I mentioned earlier, will be on our YouTube as well, so on our website. I just wanted to come to one final question, perhaps the biggest of them all, Gavin, is do you think these standards will go far enough and quickly enough to address the climate and ecological emergency? So what it all comes down to, really.
So very simple answer, yes and no. I say from a climate point of view, if we were really going to address this in a low risk, low cost, high confidence way, quite frankly, we should have done this 25 years ago. And certainly we've lost 6 or 7 years since 2016. So that's the no, it's not going fast enough. Putting a practical hat on, we are where we are, irrespective of what's happened in the past. This is the largest, most complicated, fully integrated, multiple part change to the building regulations in 30 years. And it's going to hit significantly faster in practice in the industry than anything else. So to some extent, we are where we are. We don't particularly want to be there, but it's as probably as fast as we dare go at this stage.
So excellent answer there, Gavin. Thank you. And thank you again to everyone who's attended. I think we'll close the Q&A there. We're just running out of time. But yes, thank you, Gavin, for your excellent talk and great answers to the questions as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's it from us today. As I mentioned, the recording will be available on our YouTube and website. So please do go back and watch it if you wish, and encourage others to do so as well. And that's it from us today. So thank you very much, and goodbye for now.